Welcome. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. I want to give everyone time to filter in and join us. I know we're also getting closed captioners set up right now. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining from. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, as we're filtering in, yeah, please feel free, jump in the chat, introduce yourselves. We'll get started here in 1 minute. Looks like folks are filtering in now. We have closed captioning. So really, I want to just welcome everyone to this session, our keynote speaker, Abby. I am Tracy Stout, Head of Research and Instructional Services at Missouri State University in Springfield, Missouri. Current chair for the Missouri A and OER Conference Planning Committee also. So we definitely welcome you all here. Excited to have you. A few logistical items to note before we begin. We do have live captioning during this presentation, and you can toggle this on and off using the attendee controls at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded, and we'll provide this on the conference website following the conference. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of this presentation. We definitely encourage you all to engage with us and other attendees throughout the session in the chat. I see that you all are chatting now, so that's great. If you have any technical difficulties, you can contact the organizers using the link at the bottom of the Sched site. I don't know if I say that correctly. I probably mispronounce it every time. And now it is my great pleasure to announce our keynote speaker. Abby Elder is the Open Access and Scholarly Communication Librarian at Iowa State University. In this role, Abby manages Iowa State University's open education program and supports scholars who are interested in sharing their work. In addition to this role at ISU, Abby also serves as a statewide open education coordinator for the Iowa Open Education Action Team. Whew, that's a lot. That's a mouthful there. Where they collaborate with colleagues across Iowa to advance the use of open educational resources. So please help me in welcoming Abby.
Right. Thank you, Tracy. That was a very good introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here to speak to you all today. It's been great to see all of the amazing talks you have lined up before and after this on your schedule. I wish I could attend all of them, but Open Education Week being what it is, sadly a bit busy at the moment. But I hope you have a great time listening and learning with the other speakers today. And I'm glad to be here to share my own talk titled There's No Blueprint. Recognizing paths forward to support open education. There are a few different reasons why I've chosen this title for my talk. First, it goes well with the theme of the conference, which is always fun. Second, we can all benefit from thinking about pushing back against the idea that best practices apply to everyone and we can all implement the same sorts of projects at our institutions and organizations with the same results. But largely, I chose this because I want to help you all recognize the different paths that you have in front of you and how you can build one that works best for you and your institution. Because finding the best path for you is not always easy. Yeah, we can all see the paths that other people have taken before us. We can recognize the worn trails in the grass to really extend that metaphor, maybe a little bit too far. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the same steps will get you the same results. After all, many of us here today are working at entirely different institutions with different institutional norms, priorities, budgets, staffing, and maybe you're supporting open education as a lone faculty member or staff member, and you don't have the infrastructure that an administrator or even a librarian like me might have access to. So, to sort of get us off on the right foot today and help us learn a little bit more about each other, I want to start with a question and ask you all what group or role is primarily responsible for supporting or advocating for OER at your institution? Is it a librarian or a library unit, a group like your Office of Distance Education, individual faculty members, someone else? Share your context in the chat so we can learn a little bit more about where you're coming from in this. I'll give us 1 minute to talk that over, and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. Yeah, Center for Learning, always a good one. Librarians, specifically you. Thanks, Tim. Individual faculty members, instructional designers with librarians. It's a good mix of things so far. I especially like this note. The library mostly does, but individual faculty have a lot of leeway. We're more of a clearinghouse of information for them. Yeah, so some people will have a much more integrated program for open education, and other people might be more of a, hey, when people are interested, they come ask questions, and there's a little bit of information available. One person notes, yeah, we have a faculty continuing education group that provides a channel for this as well. Good to know. Bookstore, instructional designers, faculty, and librarians. Yeah. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your context in the chat. Please feel free to keep sharing if you'd like to. We're going to go ahead and move on, but I hope this has given you a little bit of an idea of there are lots of different ways where this can be supported. Moving on, I think it helps now that we've taken a second to recognize that we're coming into this conversation with different needs and backgrounds, that there are some general trends we can look to when it comes to supporting open education. I'm using this handy Google Slides graphic here to start things off, but I want to note that while this is a pyramid, it isn't as strict a hierarchy as it appears. Usually, the things at the bottom of the pyramid are going to start your initiative, and the things that go up will fall into place later on, but that's not the case for everyone. So, what is at the bottom here? Well, first, you'll start with a basic focus on outreach and advocacy. How many people know about OER at your institution? How many know about open pedagogy or open educational practices? How many understand what it means to apply a Creative Commons license to a work? Sharing information, hosting workshops and trainings, and presenting to groups across your institution can help make open education feel less like a niche side interest and more like an exciting opportunity that different groups want to engage with. This is why, usually, when you're taking your first step into supporting OER, you start with that outreach piece, just to get out and help people understand it. From there, we next come to tools and services. So, a lot of the time, as some people noted in the chat, OER support is not necessarily an actual role or full-time position. As we just shared, my own title here is Open Access and Scholarly Communication Librarian. OER was an additional interest area added onto my position soon after I was hired here, and I just haven't changed my title yet. However, when interest from instructors began growing and our OER advocacy work showed results, it became clear that we needed to have explicit services, support structures, and tools available to support them. So, hiring a student assistant or officially making open education a portion of a staff member's role might be a natural step once outreach and advocacy work has sort of taken hold at your institution. Similarly, sharing information about tools like Manifold, LibreText, or Pressbooks that can help people find, share, and host OER can be useful for expanding your work a little bit further. But what if you want to go a little bit past that? Well, following tools and services, we then come to incentives and acknowledgements. Now, again, I want to note that this pyramid structure is not a hard and fast rule. There is no blueprint. You might have started your OER work because of an incentive program, or all OER advocacy at your institution might have been ad hoc until a staff member was hired to support that work explicitly. But incentive programs like grants and acknowledgments like promotion and tenure support for OER are often more successful when they're building on a base of strong awareness and support for those who want to explore that work explicitly. So, okay, you've got outreach, you've got support, you've got incentives, and finally, open education initiatives might include policies and institutional norms built around the topic. For example, you might have a standing OER committee on campus with a charge from your provost, president, chancellor, whatever you call them. You might have an open pedagogy faculty learning community that meets annually with support from instructional designers and subject matter experts. Or you might just have a budget for your OER initiative that includes ongoing funding for grants, staffing, or tools that you might need. Having this as a standard part of your institution's open education work basically makes your work easier and helps support the long-term sustainability of everything below it. But in reality, open education programs are often not built around developing sustainable infrastructures that support open education as a norm. They're built around helping instructors engage with and adopt open educational resources. That other stuff is great, but maybe you want to take a step back and look at what really falls on those two bottom layers of the pyramid, outreach and advocacy, and staffing and tools. What kind of outreach is this? What sorts of services could you implement? Well, usually the work revolves around helping instructors engage with OER. And that might be through helping them understand, find, adopt, adapt, or create open educational resources for their courses. Or it could be helping them just understand what's available for their needs already. There are several ways that this work might be done, and recognizing that there are options for how helpful you can be in charting the course for other people can also help you make a path that's right for your institution. And going back to our discussion about sustainable infrastructures, there's more you can do to help your OER initiative thrive besides just being there for instructors. In addition to directly supporting them as they engage with OER, you can also help your institution by collecting data on the use of OER on campus, by understanding how you can support students, showcasing the impact of programming, funding, or support that you have received already, developing new programming that can help instructors find and utilize your support more effectively, or highlighting publications, whether that's the publication of a new OER or the publication of an article assessing the impact of the use of OER in a course. And once again, you can incentivize all of those things that instructors are doing, finding, adopting, adapting, supplementing, and creating OER. So I've just provided two very different ways of thinking about how an open education initiative can be developed. Maybe it's about types of investments we're making, from projects to people to funding to policies. Or maybe it's about the specific actions we're taking to support the use of OER and to pave the way for instructors doing the hard work. But I think both are pretty good. They're good at helping you think about different ways that you can support people and develop programs that work for your institution, matching both what you already have to work with and what you could do from there. So we're past the preamble now. It was a long one, but we're ready to look at how you can find your own path, one that works for you and your community specifically. And I hate to say it, but in order to really understand what works for you, you have to acknowledge that maybe you don't know your community well enough yet. Before anything else, you should run a community scan, assessing any gaps and opportunities in awareness, the use of services, partnerships that could be leveraged as part of your open education initiative's development. Some questions you might ask include, are OER actually known at my institution? Are they acknowledged as an option for affordability or zero-cost textbook initiatives? Are they integrated into any programs or majors beyond the base course-by-course level? In addition to this question about whether people know about OER, you might also explore whether any existing support for open education at your initiative is being utilized or underutilized, and by whom. Is there a particular school or program that really likes to engage with you, and why, and how can you learn from their example? In addition to exploring how well OER specifically is known and used in your context, it can also help to explore related initiatives and how they're managed and supported. For example, do your instructional designers have any long-running learning communities that they support and on what topics? Are there any popular workshop series or grant programs managed by your administration that you could learn more about? And how do most instructors and staff learn about these opportunities themselves? Is there a campus-wide newsletter or mailing list, or do smaller departmental outlets get more traction? Understanding these sorts of high-level opportunities to engage with other people across your institution can help you identify key partners that you could connect with as you begin to expand your work with OER. Now, I just mentioned you should assess your institution and identify existing programs and popular venues for communicating, but why? Well, first, because you can also use those venues to highlight your work, but also because you might be able to identify new partners and peers through that process. Now, here I've listed a few different types of people you might engage with as you're growing your OER initiative to help you build a stronger base and more representative base for further community outreach. Faculty, of course, are on the list, but also students, particularly student government representatives, instructional designers, librarians, particularly subject or liaison librarians, not just OER librarians, staff from a distance education or online learning center, and partners from groups like registrars' offices, advisors, financial aid, and campus stores. These sorts of groups are intimately aware of how the textbook selection and reporting process works at your institution, and they're good people to have on your side so you can understand different inroads for projects like course markings or zero textbook cost degree programs. So I'm going to ask another question for the chat. What people or groups in your context could you work with to support open education initiatives, aside from the ones that you already mentioned earlier? And it can be someone I left off of that list if I did forget someone that you think, oh, actually, those guys. Teaching and learning centers, Student Government Association. It's always hard to get in contact with student government sometimes, but it's incredibly rewarding when you can find people in those groups that are actually engaged with OER work because they can get things moving that maybe you wouldn't be able to on your own. Absolutely. The note about administrative buy-in. Yes, having an actual provost or dean on a group that you're working with or connecting with them more directly can be incredibly important. Campus committees, like learning resources committees, if those exist. Faculty governments, IT. Absolutely. And wider consortia, also very useful. I'll call it there. But please continue to think through other groups that you might engage with in your institution and beyond. So each of the groups I listed and many of the others you brought up, like IT, bring something really useful to your OER work. They bring perspective. Now, not all of them need to be in constant contact with you. I'm not proposing you make an OER committee with representatives from each of these groups. That would be a lot to manage, especially. However, building relationships across your institution, making note of how you might partner with specific projects that are interest to both of you can be incredibly rewarding. And that's one of the biggest takeaways I have for those just starting out with their open education work. Do not assume that everyone else cares about OER as much as you do, or that they understand open anything. I was incredibly naive in this regard when I started out, and it took some learning to move past it. But learning about what our partners care about and finding ways to connect OER to those topics ended up being much more valuable for me in the long run. And it helped me build stronger connections with other partners on our campus. For example, one of my longest running supporters here at Iowa State is our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. From the very beginning, one of their staff members who managed their team-based learning faculty learning community, say that 10 times fast, was very engaged with our OER group, and she loved the idea of building an open pedagogy support into the programming they already had taking place. So, as a first step toward making a potential open pedagogy learning community, we worked on a 2-day open pedagogy summit over the summer, which faculty were paid for participating in to help build interest in the topic. And notably, we recruited from among the members of the TBL learning community for that group. After all, if you're already experimenting in the classroom and trying new ways to engage students in constructive learning, you're likely going to be at least curious about open pedagogy. We leveraged her contacts, we built a pilot, and now, a couple years later, that project hasn't gone anywhere. It didn't end out becoming anything bigger. And this is true for two reasons. One, I am one person, and I don't have enough faculty engaged and knowledgeable about open pedagogy to run a learning community yet. And two, the partner who I was most excited to work with and who was doing a lot of this sort of team building ended up leaving for a job somewhere else. So without me having the time to invest in a long-running professional development program or the energy from the partner who is no longer at our Center for Learning and Teaching, I just couldn't keep up. Which brings me to a very important note. Partnerships like these require upkeep. You can't assume that these projects are going to keep running just because an office is still represented. As staff come and go, you can't assume that new staff, students, and administrators will share the values of their predecessors. So, especially for partners like student government representatives who might swap out every 1 to 2 years, and administrators who are where the money comes from, it's important to make sure you're keeping in contact with these groups and keeping them updated on why and how you're supporting the use of open educational resources. And can do that in a lot of different ways. Again, there's no one right answer. Maybe you have a regular committee meeting with representatives from across campus. Maybe you check in annually to see how things are going or to plan for new events and programming to come. Maybe you just check in via email to reaffirm that you're on the same page about what you're working on and that you can do more together. Regardless, you should remember that relationships like these are a two-way street. Cross-campus partnerships are not free labor for your OER initiative. They are the people who you can turn to ask questions, get feedback, partner or brainstorm with to do new and different things. And you might not have thought of them before. Whenever possible, you should participate in their goals and their programming as well to show that you care about the things that they do, if you're able to, of course. Now, I've talked a lot about finding people in your context and keeping up connections with them, but this goes beyond your institution as well. As someone mentioned in the chat earlier, consortiums are also a great group that you could get in touch with to really understand what's going on outside of your institutional context. I'm personally deeply involved with our local statewide OER action team, Iowa OER, helping run our website, social media presence, monthly meetings, faculty communities of practice, and some other things. And that's just a few examples of things that happen because we have a statewide action team interested in supporting open education. But in your context, there may be more or different opportunities to engage in as well. The Missouri OER State Action Team is available, of course, but also groups like Open Oregon, Viva in Virginia, Affordable Learning Georgia in Georgia, obviously, and many others provide opportunities for their local colleges to get connected with peers. And some of these groups have shared resources, grants, and other services available, so check out what they have available for you. Gonna check the chat real quick. I see things moving. Partnerships are key, yes. And if you don't have a state or regional group to connect with, there are also national groups like the Open Education Network, the Community College Consortium for OER, and others that you can explore to learn more. You have a lot of options. That's one of the big takeaways for this presentation, really. There's no one right way to get involved with OER, to get engaged with the community, to build your program. What matters is making an effort and finding the path that works for you based on what you have to work with. So far, we've covered two different ways to conceptualize the structure of an open education program. We've talked about the types of partners that you might get in touch with and relationship upkeep with them. So next up, we have how to actually get started with building your open education initiative. The first thing to do, of course, whether you're building an OER initiative from scratch or growing one you already have, is to figure out what you're gonna do. When I was starting out, I did a very useful exercise as part of the Spark Open Education Leadership Program, where I was asked two questions, both of which I'm going to ask you now. One, what is one project you really want to do at your institution? Your pie in the sky, I want to make this happen sort of project. Take a minute and You can share it in the chat or just keep it in your brain. And it might be something that seems very far away, like getting a whole zero textbook cost degree off the ground. It might be course marking across your institution, collecting data on the cost of all materials at your school. There's a lot of different ways this could come together. And the second thing I want to ask is, what version of that project could you do with the staff, funding, and resources you have at your disposal right now? Don't say I couldn't do it at all. What version, whether it's a small little copy of it or a pilot or a single course or a single aspect of it, could you get in motion right now? Maybe if you want to do a zero textbook cost degree program, you'll start with an assessment of an individual program that you know has interest in OER and identifying the resources that already exist that might align to their courses. Figure out a way to pitch or ask for support to fund a project like this. This is less about thinking about, okay, I can't do this at all, and more about finding the steps that'll get you a little bit closer to an eventual larger goal. And world peace, yes. So, as you're identifying projects like this and thinking about what's possible, whenever you're starting something new, it helps to set goals that are reasonable for you and what you have at hand. That doesn't mean you have to set small goals and only pursue projects that are small by design. It's more about starting with the pieces of those goals that you can actually accomplish and that you can assess so you can report on them and say, if we do more of this, we can reach this larger goal. Making that case with actual data to back it up means that you're more likely to get something out of it in the long run. You want to get a grant program off the ground, figure out what you could do with a grant program with annual funding of $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, and set up that scale so that no matter what you get, you'll be able to make something work. Maybe none of these things will work. Maybe you won't get any of the funding you ask for, but also maybe you'll have an administrator that's willing to run a pilot with a low amount to see what the return on investment looks like. Sometimes we have to just try things and see what happens. In fact, that's another example I wanted to share today. That's exactly what I did when I proposed my university build an OER mini grant program 7 years ago now. In my proposal, I included the following information. How many colleges in the United States had active OER grant programs, what amounts their grants offered to faculty, and if it was a standard amount or scaled based on project type. You don't have to have all this information. I went above and beyond. Two, how many instructors at our institution currently were using OER, the impact that had on our students in cost savings or testimonials, and how we were generally behind others at similar schools when it came to OER use and support. We especially highlighted the fact that we're doing less than our rival school, the University of Iowa, because that helps the administration get fired up about doing more. And three, how much funding I wanted to get and what we could accomplish at different funding levels. So again, I said, okay, if we have $5,000, we can give support for faculty who want to adopt OER at a limited point. If we can get $10,000, we can give support for faculty who want to adopt OER and maybe small creation projects, like if you're adapting something or creating something supplementary. And if we get $30,000, maybe we could also have a staggered grant program with different levels. Thinking about what we could do and seeing what we could get in the process. Having that assessment in place of what other people were doing and providing options for how we could accomplish something small or something more helped drive home that one way or another, we were going to do more with OER. We were just going to have to figure out how much more based on the support we could get. But how would you go about finding an example for what you want to do if you wanted to make the case that you could be doing more? Well, in my case, it's sort of osmosis at this point. I know that I love the open pedagogy support at North Carolina State. I know that Fanshawe University in Canada has one of the most well-rounded OER publishing programs out there and really wonderful design. I know College of the Canyons in California has one of the best branded and communicated zero textbook cost degree programs in the United States. But you can always start by searching for OER library guide or press release, zero textbook costs, or OER plus grant programs plus high impact. Just searching around for examples of a particular type of program and seeing what works for you. And if you can't find much there, that's what mailing lists and friends are for. Look around, see what you can find, and ask people, hey, who do you go to as a good example of this sort of workshop, this sort of program? What do you think is a really good example I could look at to base ours off of? And then, of course, you don't have to base it off of it completely. You can also tweak things based on your needs and what you have available. So, back up here with our next question. Could you please share a project, initiative, or event you've seen somewhere else that you would like to implement in your own context? Who are your exemplars that you look up to or that you want to emulate at your own institution? And if you don't have anyone, that's okay as well. You can figure out later. Yeah, figuring out a student government association faculty recognition program. I know there's one in Texas that's very good. If you look up the OER awards, one of them. I like the College of the Canyons Z degree options, absolutely. A community of practice around OER for faculty. Look up faculty learning circles. They are very cool. An OER cooperation or agreement with General Ed Committee and guidelines, absolutely. There are a lot of really great things happening all over the place. We do not have to start from scratch. Never build what you can borrow from someone else. And it's best to see what people have built, in part so you can figure out what works, but also in part so you have more ideas to work from as you're building out your program. Boy, I really hope any notifications I'm getting are not showing up above my slides. A campus-wide OER policy too, absolutely. We were very lucky here to have our student government pass a recognition note in favor of OER, saying we want our administration to support faculty that are using OER on campus. And that's a document that I often share out with folks and say, hey, if you need some sample language for your student government to use, feel free to ask. All right. So many good ideas. So let's keep moving on. Once you've identified the direction you want to go, the program that you like, whether it's building a committee, starting a grant program, hosting a workshop series, or just convening a panel of current OER champions, you can put together a pilot of that work. Now, you might say, why call it a pilot if it's a one-off panel or event? And the answer to that is every new thing you try is better if you consider it a pilot. Because if no one attends your event or people just don't come to your faculty panel, I've been there, it feels a lot better when afterwards you can say, okay, what did we learn from this pilot? Did we choose a bad time? Was the description of the event bad? Do we have to find a better way to communicate this on campus? And how can we do better next time? Or if it goes really well, you can also ask, what set this apart from things we've done in the past? What did we do differently? And how can we do that again? Is there just a lot of interest in OER now? Or is it this specific side topic in the way that we described it that people are interested in? These are all great questions to ask, and you can answer some of them by connecting with your partners that you identified earlier on in your program's development. So, we're coming up on our last section here, and I want you to think about ways you can recognize how open education works in your context. The final piece to the puzzle takes us right back to the start, assessing what's going on and following up on what we find. From the very beginning, I noted that how you approach open education on your campus will depend on what your community cares about. Do you have a strong campus commitment to affordability and student access? Focus on that. Is there a statewide push to support higher education and higher retention for students across higher ed? Bring up the research about OER and how it supports those goals. But once you get started, it's just as important to assess the work you're doing, both so you can follow up on what you find and to share the good news and ask for more support when you're doing well. So, there's a lot of things you can do to assess your program. The easiest is to collect static data. How many courses are using OER? And how many of those are returning or new faculty? Has anyone stopped using OER and why? Are more people attending your workshops or trainings these days or not? Are there more questions coming in about OER to library staff or to those who support your initiative outside of the library? There are a lot of things you can assess here, but they're only the first step toward really assessing what you've done. Because lower attendance numbers for a workshop or learning community just tells you there were less people. That doesn't necessarily tell you why. You want to find the why, so you also can get that information by getting feedback. I recommend following up with your peers and partners locally to see what feedback they might have for you on your recent projects. This can be done informally, like dropping by their office to ask what they thought of something, or more formally, like setting up a meeting to discuss data you've pulled that you might want their input on. And you may be surprised what you find. Did your YouTube video feature actually fall under the fold in the university newsletter and no one scrolled down to see it? Did you happen to schedule your OER 101 training on the same day as new faculty orientation? It happens. There are a lot of factors you might not have been aware of going in that having these external partners can help you avoid in the future and understand as you're getting things assessed and reviewed. And finally, you can get community feedback, broader input on what you're doing. It's not just about the static data or the feedback from people you trust, quote unquote. Broader input on what you're doing from the community can be more informal, like a poll in a newsletter, or more formal, like an IRB sponsored survey that goes out to all faculty asking about their awareness and use of your OER support services. Having this feedback means that you can get a better idea of how well your message is actually spreading on campus and what people understand about the work that you're doing. Of course, again, how you approach this work and why really depends on you. Because assessment isn't about knowing how things went all the time. It's about knowing how things went so you can do things differently or better or more consistently. Not just what happened, but why. Back to our questions. What's one strategy you've used to assess programming that was included in my list just now? Not just collecting data, not just asking for feedback. What's something you've done that you found really useful for assessing things you've worked on? And it can be something I did mention earlier if you can only think of things I already did touch on. Student responses to OER use, of course. Student testimonials are always great. Download analytics from the institutional repository, absolutely. Actually seeing OER use numbers right in front of you and being able to tell, oh, this thing that our instructors created or used are actually getting use, whether that's at our institution or elsewhere. Oh, yeah. Having the faculty members themselves add questions to their end of semester surveys for students asking, hey, what did you think about the materials? And getting that data to work from is also really useful, especially if they phrase it well. Sometimes the students are like, what do you mean, OER? Feedback from faculty actually implementing OER, talking about, hey, how do I think it went? How did the students engage with it? Just giving their honest opinions. These are all great ideas. I especially like the OER office hours idea, although it's concerning sometimes because, as with normal office hours, sometimes no one comes for the whole hour, 2 hours, and sometimes you have 8 people all trying to talk to you at one time. Sometimes it feels better to just host a forum. All right. So these are some really good ideas of ways that you can get in touch with people. Please feel free to save the chat yourself after this if you'd like to keep those ideas for the future. But next, I'm going to talk about what comes after you assess your program. Just because you start too small or too big and you say, "Oops, after assessing this, I realized that I have done too much," does not mean that you cannot change your work later. As you develop and build your initiatives, you can also scale it according to your needs. This might mean scaling up to support more interested instructors and students who want to work with you, or it might mean scaling down to accommodate your workload and the resources you have on hand through your local and regional support systems. After all, you may have a great team of peers who want to work with you and collaborate on projects and share feedback, but that doesn't mean that they're also available to help you answer your emails or present to courses or work with you on very specific projects that really only you can handle. Scaling down your work can seem like a failure, but in reality, it shows that you're making smart decisions to prioritize helping those who need it the most while also not burning yourself out. For example, here's my last example. Here at Iowa State University, we've had to scale down the direct support we offer to authors publishing OER with us. I used to not only import and format content in Pressbooks for our users, but also copy edit, source images, create the attribution statements, create new diagrams when openly licensed ones weren't available, and sometimes collaboratively author and edit open textbooks with our faculty. That's not necessarily sustainable for someone who technically does not have that in my job description. So, what could I do? Well, what we did here was look at our press's workload and figure out a more sustainable process that could accommodate those who need extra support without leaving the doors wide open for bad actors or those who would rather leave something like citation checks to the librarians. We developed a proposal process for those who want to publish a new OER with us, pre-production meetings to set expectations and train authors on working within our publishing platform, and stopgaps in our workflow where we can review a project for accessibility and copyright. Focusing on what was most important for us to handle and making it clear what our authors are expected to do helped everyone feel more supported and secure in our publication process. So the scaling down, while it might have felt like a failure to begin with, in the end ended up making everyone feel more happy about the situation. In fact, some might say this feels like scaling up. It's a formalization of processes, but it's really scaling down the amount of work we're doing by putting policies in place that can protect me and other staff we might hire down the line to support our faculty. This is really close to my last question, but I have another one. Have you ever had to stop or scale down a process at your work? How did you make that decision? And do you have tips for others who want to scale down something or scale up something? If you haven't had the chance to do that yet because you're still getting started, that's also good feedback. I think that is probably the best one, Robert. Thank you. Be honest and transparent with supervisors and colleagues about your needs. Sometimes the best way to say, "Hey, I need to scale this down," is just to let the people know around you this is something that is unsustainable to keep happening. Be willing to delegate if you have the ability to, or ask for assistance from others. Again, having these relationships across campus with other partners who care about the same topics you do means that you can say, "Hey, we've got this workshop coming up. Would you be willing to tag in to help out with sharing handouts, or at least help us make sure that people are signing in when they're coming to the event?" Very good notes. I'm in the collecting tips stage. Absolutely. All good. Okay. So, facilitate mentoring. Oh man, you guys, you're great. I have talked very quickly throughout this presentation. It went a little bit faster than I intended it to, so we're going to have lots of fun time for questions. But I am sad to say that I have gotten through my slides already. So, since I've gone over a lot of different tips and examples today, I'm going to do a quick roundup of everything we covered. First, everyone's context is different. You don't need to have the same projects, scope of work, or type of advocacy for OER at your institution as someone else. You should leverage the interests and opportunities available at your institution, whether that's a very engaged economics department, an existing professional development series, an interest in zero textbook cost degrees, or something else. You should connect to different groups across your institution and beyond. You may learn a lot just by connecting with these people, regardless of whether they remain long-term supporters of your OER program. You should scale your projects to your capacity, not your imagination, something I have had to remind myself often. And finally, assess and report on your progress for additional support. Because if you don't tell anyone how much you're doing to support OER or share the amazing work happening at your institution, no one will know it's happening. You have to let them know. And one more thing, I do just want to shout out a book that I worked on with a few other wonderful co-authors a few years back, the OER Starter Kit for Program Managers. Please check it out if you're interested in tips like this for your own programming, whether it comes to committees, data gathering, publishing, or more. All of these are covered in the book, so please check it out for additional tips and ideas. Now, the rest of the time is set aside specifically to answer your questions and to talk about anything that you have interest in that we've covered today. And because we covered a lot, please feel free to ask away.
I love that. Thank you, Abby. Yeah, please feel free to ask questions. We have a Q&A section that you can ask questions there, or just put them in the chat. Either way, that was wonderful. I was trying to take notes and ask questions too, and there's a lot here, Abby.
Yeah,
But I really loved your idea that everything is a pilot, because during Open Access Week, I had a faculty panel come in to share their experiences, and the only people that attended were library folks. And we tried really hard to market it. And so it was, I think the panelists had a good discussion amongst themselves. So it didn't feel like a complete fail, but yeah, I think it is best to think of things as a pilot. So I really appreciated that tip. Um,
no problem at all. In fact, I ran two panels last year. One that had 20 people show up and they were very engaged and they asked wonderful questions, and one that had one person show up that wasn't on the panel, and we just turned it into a round table and everyone talked to each other. So sometimes, even within the same context, something goes wrong, you pick a bad date, you don't know what it is, and it's best to reflect on it and figure out, okay, next year, December's just not happening.
right. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so we do have a question. Thoughts on how to gain more support for OER creation as having a more prominent role in the tenure and promotion process for faculty?
Absolutely. I recommend first starting with looking at your current faculty handbook. So seeing what the guidelines are in place and if there's anything extra already built in. So some people might already have support for things like we have scholarship of teaching and learning covered in our faculty handbook as promotion tenure support. So if someone is researching the work happening in their course and saying, "Ooh, here's something really interesting we're doing. I published on it," then that's going to count for them. So assessing the impact of OER in your course would count for promotion and tenure in that case. Other people might have specific support for open access book publishing. So if your instructors are putting together open textbooks, instead of calling them open textbooks, calling them open access books is more likely to actually get that support. Finding ways to use the language that's already in place at your institution to support what they need. But if you're trying to advocate for it more generally, I recommend checking out the materials from doers on open educational resources and promotion and tenure, or our own group. Let me see if I can get the ept.pubpub.org. has put together this guide on open education, promotion, tenure, and faculty development, which also adapts the materials from doers to show some examples what you could do.
That is great. I know we've talked about that a little bit at my institution, but yeah, I feel like we come back to that base level. And so
Mhm.
we're just not quite there yet.
I think it
Um,
helps. Robert asked the very important question of who's involved in that process. You need to find those people and talk to them, not just say, I'm going to talk to the higher ups and tell them to do this because they may not be in charge of it. They may not be involved in it. Actually finding the faculty community or the different groups on campus that are involved in maintaining those documents are going to be more useful over time.
um, I did have my own question while we're waiting for other questions to come in. What are some ways to really share the work you're doing on campus? And so I'm the lone OER librarian, even though it's also not in my title. As librarians, I think we have a hard time really kind of promoting ourselves. So what are some really good ways to get out there and promote OER?
Yeah, self-advocating. It's not easy. No matter what type of staff member you are, if you are staff at a higher education institution, you kind of rely on your deans or department chairs to go out and do the talking for you and promote what you're doing, and that can be difficult. So what I recommend is finding ways to get in front of the people who will actually care about this topic. So getting on the agendas for department meetings, getting into the agendas for dean and college chairs to talk to them about the initiatives that you're running, the support that you have, and outcomes of that work. Depending on what you have to share, the group you present to will be different. So if you're saying, oh, I've got this new grant program I'm getting off the ground, I want people to know about it, talk to the departments. If you're saying, oh, I've got outcomes to report on this new student data dashboard we're putting together, then you present to the deans and to the provost and to these other groups. But getting in front of those people, also a question. It can help to find the little inroads you have, whether that's talking to a supervisor or chair that has access to these committees. They might present on your behalf because it's also them bragging about their units. Or it could be a way of just getting in to talk to someone who's on one of those groups to begin with. Because if you can get a meeting with the provost and say, here's these cool things, they might say, oh, let's bring you into this group that I have meeting regularly, and you can talk to them about it so we can highlight something happening. Again, under a unit that I supervise to highlight the great work that I'm doing. Make it a bragging situation for them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Not seeing other questions. Mm, So I'm just going to keep asking my own questions. I know.
Whenever one comes in, we'll answer it. So webinar chat, send them in.
Yeah. Okay. So collecting good data on OER, that has been such a struggle for my campus, at least. And I had someone I was working with at the bookstore who was trying to help me with this, and she retired. So when you were mentioning that, you start working on projects and then those people, leave the university, then it's hard to know where to go from there. Thankfully, they did replace her. And this person is all on board with OER, and she's trying to help me collect data. But it's very kind of grassroots effort, it seems like. So it's kind of like individual faculty that reach out to her. So have you found a good way or have suggestions on how to, I know it's a tough question, on how to collect OER data?
It's hard in part because it's another one of these situations where you can't say, well, at every school, this is how it will work, because every school manages this data differently. At some, your reporting for what textbooks are adopted and selected for different courses are sent into the library or the registrar's office or the bookstore or a different group. So who has the data to begin with is going to be different, meaning who you contact will be. It's also important to remember that it is an HEOA requirement that instructors turn in their textbook adoption data to whatever unit is responsible for it. But the actual percentage of people that do is different at every institution. Our bookstore brags that we get 80 to 70% data, which is apparently good, but that's the problem. It's also hard because with OER specifically, people think, I don't have to tell anyone, they don't have to order the print books, so why would I bother? But without reporting to someone, that means that you don't have that information either. So what we've done here is we have a two-pronged process. We first have an OER submit your adoption form so people can self-report. And then apart from that, tell our bookstore and we put in their messaging, and our office sends out when they put out their call for textbook selections. Hey, make sure you include if you're using OER. Make sure you report it to us as well. So if they get something that we don't, then they send it to us. And if we get something that they don't, we send it to them. So we have more complete data as a whole to work off of.
That is great. I like that approach. Okay, we do have a question here. Do you have tips on getting students involved in OER?
Absolutely. I've been shocked by how engaged students are in OER work, depending on the student and depending on the year. In fact, our OER committee started because our student government president in 2017 attended a presentation from US Student Pergs and learned about their Make Textbooks Affordable program and their support for open textbooks generally. And he was so excited about doing more in this area and building out something great. He got our OER resolution off the ground. He was going out on campus, talking to legislators, like really involved in making things happen. And just giving him the tools to do that was all we had to do in that case. He learned about it, and then we said, okay, here's some handouts from US Student Pergs. Here's some overview FAQ information in case people ask you questions. And also, please avoid things like this. And here's where it helps to give students specific things to do and things not to do. The thing not to do is to say, make all faculty required to use OER. I told the cautionary tale to a group of students last week of the University of Hawaii system and how their legislators got really excited about OER when they first heard about them a few years back and said, we're going to require that everyone use these. I said, no, don't do that. Give people support to do it. Recommend it, share it as an option, but don't say we're going to require everyone do this because you're just going to put a really bad taste in people's mouths when they think about this moving forward. So first, support people that care. Second, give them specific things to do. And third, make sure that their excitement is not pushed in the wrong direction. Those are my main tips for working with students. But if they're not already involved in OER, it helps to start really small and say, hey, here's what open textbooks are being used at our university. Here's what courses they're used in. Do you want to help us promote the instructors that are doing this already? Do you want to help us give them a kudos or a pat on the back? Send in a letter that says, we care about this. That's one way to get them involved in little places first.
That's so great. That is great. Okay. Check the chat and the Q&A, and I'm not seeing any more questions.
So we can do a final call. Oh no.
Oh, I know. Final call. Final call, y'all.
And it can be about something I haven't covered today. Feel free to be absolutely random with it. What's something you're working on that you've been wanting advice on? Tracy, this goes for you too.
Yes. Good.
Ooh, hello, Lena. Okay, what's the weirdest OER you've seen? That is a wonderful question. I think it's hard to say what's the weirdest OER you've seen because weird is subjective. You could say, oh, there's some really cool OER I've seen that have done interesting, strange things with things. There are OER that are really more of digital projects that a course has done and less OER explicitly. One of my favorites, let me pull up, let's see here. Of course, there's a Liberated Learners Project, which is a beautiful open textbook that's award-winning and has all these cool different things going on with it. But one of my favorite projects I've seen that's just different is the Domestic Knowledge Pub, which is a set of recipes that have been reviewed by students, old recipes, digital humanities projects, essays, uh, really an interesting way to get students thinking about what domestic knowledge is and how it applies in a historical context. And it's not something you think about when you think of OER. This is one of those you think about digital humanities projects and you think about something like this, but you don't think about how it applies to a class and how students might engage with this sorts of information. So that's a fun one for me. We got more questions while I was talking. Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah. So an OER course for faculty in Canvas, how to incentivize them to take it.
Ooh, thinking about it. The first thing I would say is you could see about integrating it into new faculty orientation. So that's the easiest way is saying, hey, we have these group of people coming in doing required trainings, getting in touch with the different resources on campus already. Part of that process is learning what's available and support for them, making it something that as you're going through your onboarding, you're also learning about how to use Canvas and what OER are so you can make the most of those tools. Also, making it part of Canvas training could be a useful way of incentivizing that to actually move forward for folks. That's the easiest thing for me to say. Beyond that, it's hard. It's hard to get people to take optional courses that just exist on the web. So integrating it into an existing system is the best case.
Great. The next question that came in, beyond Pressbooks and OpenStax, are there other places to look for OER that you would recommend?
Many, many. One moment. Let me pull up my library guide. I apologize, folks. So obviously there is also LibreTexts, where you can find a lot of really great OER, both of those that were originally in OpenStax or Pressbooks and those that are originally made there. OER Commons is excellent for finding, especially if you want a mix of K-12 and higher ed resources. Oasis and Merlot are both tools that integrate and search throughout other places. And if you're just looking for textbooks, the Open Textbook Library is actually your best bet to start with because it collates materials in one place with reviews. But all of those are on my guide.
Perfect. And if you won't mind, I will link to that from our website too after the session.
And EdTech books, if you're talking about education specifically or OER about OER, also great place. Yeah.
And then how do you move forward when faculty stop responding, currently waiting for final review of OER with their name on it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a problem. Uh, Honestly, it's a question of how worth it is it? So, is this a faculty member you've spent a lot of time with that you have a rapport with, and you're just, for some reason, they stop talking for a month or two? In that case, I would give it a break for a little bit and then reach out later and say, hey, checking back in on this. How are things going? Do you need help with this? Blah, blah, blah. Did I miss an email? Sometimes asking, did I miss an email, puts the ball in their court to say, oh, no, I must have forgot to hit send. And then they'll respond to you. So that's less shame on their part. But also, if this isn't a relationship that you feel really needs to move forward, that maybe they just don't care anymore and it's okay, you can step away from it and start working with someone else on something else. Alternatively, if this is a peer reviewer working on a review of something, just find someone else to do a review. Sometimes that's also the best way to move forward. Uh, Depending on the person, again, it might just be a come back around to it or a try and reconnect, or, well, you've done your best, and sometimes it's not worth your effort to keep moving on in one area when instead you could put those efforts somewhere else.
That is great advice. That goes for anyone emailing me also, if I don't
If
respond.
if I don't respond to an email and it's been a month, just send me a reminder. It's fine,
Same, same.
especially this month.
Yeah. right. I don't see any more questions.
Thank you for the extra questions, everyone. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, those were great.
Anytime I can throw a link in the chat, I'm up for it.
Yes, and I'm trying to make sure I've saved the chat also. That's wonderful. All right. Well, I'm seeing, it looks like a thank you, Abby, in the chat. So, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you spending time with us today. That was really great, Abby. I feel like I've learned so much again. Like every time I learn things.
That is all right. Thank you. I had a great time too. I hope I didn't cover too much or too little. I hope that these are useful tips for folks. And if you do want to follow up after this, I shared my social media links at the end of my last slide. And you can also just email me if you have questions about anything I covered today. I also posted in the chat the book I shared at the end of my presentation because I realized I hadn't done that before.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this session. We hope that you continue after this with the rest of our conference sessions. We do have two more at 2 and then two more at 3 o'clock. So please attend those if you can, if your schedule allows. And also give us feedback. So after the conference, there'll be an email with a link to a survey. So definitely give us conference feedback on this. We do take it to heart and read through all the comments that come in. But yeah, and we hope you have a great rest of your day and happy Open Education Week, everyone. Happy Open Education Week, Abby.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.